Hello. Hi everyone and welcome back. Welcome to my another stream. And in this video, we are going to talk about Next Auth with Next.js. You already know that Next Auth is really popular framework, or you can say library. That library you can use for authentication for your Next.js application. And recently I was trying Next Auth with the Next.js project for my admin dashboard app. So I wanted to just share about how you can integrate Next Auth with the Next.js 13. So we are going to go through the step-by-step process, how you can integrate Next Auth for simple authentication using Google provider, Google social provider, GitHub, or any different providers, because Next Auth provides all the integration with the providers and different adapters if you want to store the session in the database. So first of all, what is Next Auth? That is important, right? What is Next Auth and how we can get started with this? So Next Auth is just a library, you can say. You can just install it using pnpm, and then you can configure the API routes in the Next.js that can handle all your sign in, callback, and sign out request. Because what you at the end, what you will be writing a simple login page where user can enter username, password, and can submit a login, or you can allow users to log in with a Google, GitHub, all these different providers. You can see there are like um, maybe 50 or 60 providers, which has a nice integration with the Next Auth. So it's like a one single stop for building authentication for your services. And you can see Next Auth is going to become a Auth.js. So Auth.js is a standard solution, maybe a standard solution for future for building a simple authentication for web client applications. So let's take a look onto the demo part, like how we can build this. We already have a React app, authentication is working there. Now what we want, we already have an admin app. There we have the Next.js 13. So we are going to add a simple Next Auth. Next Auth is a popular library that we are going to integrate with the Next.js 13, and we will see how we can do the next authentication with the existing Next.js APIs. So, I mean, if you explore Next Auth, it is like a really nice library which was not there the time when I was doing the authentication for the Next.js and SwellKit SSR application. Now we have this Next Auth, really game-changing library for building a simple authentication with the social providers or with your own external API backend. So we already have an auth service which has a Next.js auth service which is returning the cookies. What we are going to do, we are going to use this Next Auth library with our Next.js application, Next.js admin dashboard app we already have, and we are going to you can integrate with these adapters like Google, Facebook, and all. But in that case, they are going to manage the session by themselves. They are not going to talk to our backend system. So I'm going to use only the credential providers. Okay, so if you're not familiar with the Next.auth, I will talk about what is Next.auth and all. Next.auth is a popular library which is mostly popular with the Next.js. Why? Because in the Next.js server-side rendering, we always have a trouble with managing the sessions, either using the login with the Google, login with Auth0, login with the Firebase. So Next.auth is like a consolidating all these providers together, so adapters together, where you can log in with the Google, Facebook, Firebase, Auth0, maybe OpenID Connect, or some other social providers. And it also provides the credential providers where you can just pass username, password, and can do the login. Okay, and credential providers is going to access our custom API backend Next.js auth service, and based on that, it will validate the username, password, and is going to initialize the session. So in the Next.js, you will create a component, client component maybe, or just a login route where you are going to submit a form with the username, password, and that is going to be sent to this Next Auth at server side. We are going to build a Next Auth API route that will take care of login, logout, register, and all the basic cases. And then this credential provider is going to talk to your Next.js API backend we have Next.js API services, Next.js for Auth0, Next.js for this React SSR framework, and this is our Next Auth. We can see it contains two major aspects: providers and adapters. So providers are like, okay, there are many providers, social providers or authentication providers, using which you just need to plug in. We just need to create access key and secret key and log in with the Google, access key and secret key, log in with the GitHub. You don't even need to configure lots of stuff like whatever we face with these individual libraries. This is a one common library, one single stop for doing everything, I will say. Well, initially I saw that in the last year, I thought like, okay, I should cover video, but now I already have this Uber Eats clone. I can try to implement it. Here we can talk about one single starter application first, so that we will get an idea. We will explore, okay, simple Next Auth with a simple Next.js application first, which is just like a simple hello world app, and then we will integrate a simple authentication there. That is the first thing. Now after that, what we are going to do is, let's say once we understand the concepts of adapters and providers and the credential providers and all, and then we will start with this. Even we can ask ChatGPT what is Next.js, Next Auth, right? Next Auth is like a popular library for providing authentication and authorization functionality for the Next.js application. Authorization, because once you are authenticated with the Google and all, you can customize your token payload. You can populate some kind of a role or authorization role, and based on that you can actually play on the front end side. Okay, this is the role of the user who is currently logged in, and these are the access permissions he can do. So this is all about, okay, how you can integrate a Next Auth with Next.js 13, right? So how we can implement it? First of all, obviously we need to integrate with this library Next Auth. We just need to do install npm install -- save Next Auth, and then we need to create some custom API routes which can handle all the different API calls for the login, sign out and register. You can see here, after adding the Next Auth, we are attaching the Google provider. That means I want user to be can log in with the Google. So here I'm not configuring much. I'm just configuring the API key and the secret key. Rest Next Auth will take care. And at the client side, at the server side, this is how we can get the session. This is how we can get the session, get session or get server side sessions. These are the different ways. You can see use session and get server side session. Use session we can use at the client side, and get server side session at the API routes or in the server components. We can check the session. So this is use session. This you can use at the client side. Server side you cannot use. Use session is for the client side, and for the server side, I think there is something like get server side session. There is something that we can use. So what we are going to build, we are going to explore Next Auth with the Next.js 13. That is our overall agenda, and we are going to use these are the adapters. I mean, you can also store the authentication information using Prisma and all. I mean, you can have your own system where you can store the user credentials, like when you provide a register functionality and then login functionality, you can use these kind of stuff. Here I'm just using this auth0 adapters. So there are providers and adapters, like you can just log in with a Google, log in with a Facebook, log in with a Twitter. So that is like a one stop, right? Earlier I remember I used to struggle with this passport when I'm doing a login at the server side, callback URLs and all. Now it's simplified with the Next.js with Next Auth library, and this is very popular. I mean, I'm going to cover one simple example, and we will see step by step how we are going to add it. This is how I'm getting the session at the client side, and you can actually call the sign out and sign in method from Next Auth React. Sign in, it will check, okay, what all providers you have. Are you allowing login with the Google, Facebook, Twitter? Or this is get server side sessions at the API level. At the Next.js APIs, you want to know if this API is protected, are you logged in or not? And this Next Auth we are going to write to handle all our logic, like sign in, sign out and all. This is the .NextAuth.js we are going to create, and then some callback. So we will see the whole configurations, what you are going to write in the NextAuth.js and TS. So this is our main agenda. First we will see with the sample application, which has nothing to do with the Uber Eats clone. First we will see a basic application. This is our basic application. I mean, I can just talk about basic structure. It is a bootstrap tailwind Next.js application with the TypeScript support. Okay, and here we will start looking at the configuration. Okay, what is NextAuth, how to use it, and how you can build a simple application. You can even use your own database. That is for like you can integrate with if the Prisma, build your own database. You can store the session information of user in your own database after user logs in through the Google, GitHub, or any providers. So this is how we will add, and then we will create a next auth inside API auth folder. So this is the directory. We just need to create it, and then we will create a auth options. Auth options contains the providers, session, pages, all the different configurations we are going to put inside this. And we are just passing that inside a next auth. So we can just copy it, and we will try to create in our application. And what it is doing, it is handling all these API calls, API auth, sign in, callback, sign out, automatically handled by the next auth, because we have written this, we have created this route that is generic route, because it is using this spread operator ... So whatever is coming after API auth, it is going to be handled by this route handler, like sign in, callback, and sign out. Here we are using a simple next auth. And now inside app we can create the folders. This is like a simple app directory of Next.js 13. This is our root page and root layout. Nothing much, a simple root layout we have, and a default page which shows a simple image. Okay, this is like next auth. This is the port 3000. This is what it is doing, root layout and root page.tsx on the app directory. We don't have any route, we don't have any components, we don't have any library added. Now first thing we will do is we will create our APIs. Inside API we need to create API auth. So here we are creating Next.js API routes. Okay, so we already know how we create, how we structure all these Next.js things. So we'll just create a next auth nextauth.ts. I mean, this is okay, this is a folder. Inside that we are going to create route.ts. Okay, so once we have it, what we are going to do is we will just create our route.ts, that is a handler. So inside auth we need to create a next auth, that is a first of all folder, because it's a directory based API routes. If you are creating API app some folder, then all the routes respective to that URL will be pointed to that, and this is the route.tsx. So all the requests coming to API auth will be handled by the route.tsx. That is this is how the next JS app directory structure works. And we are creating the APIs, and then you can also create a pages. Inside pages you will be creating the routes, the app routes, like okay, login page, register page, profile page, and all that you will be creating inside pages. And here I am just copying this next auth configuration, and it is using GitHub provider. There can be a Google provider, GitHub provider, Facebook provider. The only important thing is getting these GitHub ID and secret ID and configuring the application callback URL, going to the GitHub console, going to the Google console, going to the Twitter console, because you are registering the application there. So you need to configure the callback URL and the origin. These are most common things almost in all the developer console when you are creating the application on the Facebook, Google, GitHub, and all. And let's see what all next auth options are. I mean, this is the TypeScript types, and you can just see what all it is providing. It provides pages. You can define all the pages which we are using, like sign in, sign out, profile pages, and all. And these are the providers which we can add all the callbacks. So whenever the authentication happens, you wanted to execute some callback. When you are fetching the session, you wanted to execute something. When you are doing a logout, you wanted to execute something. Callbacks and events. So in the callbacks, I mean, that is events. When something happens and you wanted to do something, that is event. In the callback, we are going to handle a particular scenarios. Okay, so that we will see in the example. Here, instead of GitHub provider, we can also use a Google provider, and that we need to import just by Google provider, and that is coming from the providers Google. And here, instead of this provider, these are the providers. You can see the big list, right? There is a Google, GitHub, Facebook, and all. What you need, it is giving you all the features. You can integrate with any social provider. The only thing is you need to get the GitHub ID and the GitHub secret, or the client ID and the client secret for the Google, right? That is your job, like logging into your account and getting the IDs and the secret. So these are the providers. And then similarly, we are going to add another provider, which is a credential provider. Okay, what is the use of credential providers? Okay, let's say what you are doing is, currently you can just integrate with the social providers like Google, Facebook. What you are doing is you are allowing user to use their own personal accounts to log in, and you are not even storing, you are not even validating the credentials, whatever, because they are doing a login to their Facebook or Google account, and then after accepting the consent, user consent, that user request is redirected to the Next.js, and that will initialize your session. That is first thing. But what happens, like you already have the API backend system which is already validating your user. You are not just dependent on social providers. You are allowing users to enter username, password. In that case, you validate it by your internal database, like in the Next.js, you can have your Prisma, TypeORM, Postgres, MongoDB. There you manage some user table, store the password with the hash bcrypt value and the email, and there you validate it. Otherwise, you can use your own custom backend API backend. In the Uber Eats clone app, we already have our API auth microservice, which is allowing user to log in and giving the token with all the authorization data like the user role and all. So we will be using that. And in the credential provider, what all we can do? Credential provider means user is submitting the credentials to login, like email and the password. And here this is a standard. It is taking 2 parameters, like you can submit that from the front end. These are the 2 parameters I am expecting. The email, placeholder is email, and then there is a password. And this credential provider provides authorize function, async authorize function. Using that, we can validate, okay, whatever the email and the password is coming from the front end, from the request from the client component is valid or not. So there is a async authorize function that takes these parameters, that takes these credentials, and then you can validate it, authorize. And I think what happened with this, so here in the params we are going to pass credentials. We don't need to specify the type for that. So this is the credentials we are passing. And then here what we are going to do, we are going to validate. What is the problem here? It's valid. Okay, we can return something. Okay, the double quotes are missing in the label. So in the authorize function, we are going to validate the credentials. Okay, credentials must be passed. Both should have a value, like email and the password should be passed. And you can also validate the regex, you can validate the length, all the validation criteria you can specify here, and return, like you can just return the error if those are not being matched, because front end is call of the login is going to be handled by this, and this is going to call your custom API backend. So your custom API backend is not being called directly, it is being handled from here. And here what we can do is you can return some mock data. In real picture, what we are going to do is we are going to actually call our API backend service. We already got the username and password. This is a sync function, and the end goal is we need to return the data. Return the data means, okay, user ID, email, and the role or any particular attribute. And here you can see we are going to add auth options, adapters, providers, and sessions and callback. These are all auth options. And in the API routes, we will be validating the session exists using get server session, because in the Next.js you will be writing the protected APIs. There you need to check, okay, is user logged in? Okay, I can just check it using get server session, that is coming from Next Auth. Or at the client side, I can use session to check, because there will be client only component, and then there is a server component get server side in the routes or in the components. But in the client side component, client only component, I can use session if session data contains, okay, you are logged in, otherwise you are not logged in. And here, this is important part, strategy. Because how you are going to manage the session, the strategy contains two attributes, JWT and database. And we will see what is the major difference between both the strategies. So JWT strategy, I mean, from the JWT you might already aware, okay, I'm talking about a JSON web token, right? So JSON web token is like when you do the login, Next Auth is going to generate these JSON web token based on what data you are returning, because it is going to use the secret which we are going to specify in the environment variable. It is going to use that secret, and you already returning some user data. Based on that, it is going to decode that, based on encode that data with the secret key, and then it will create a token for you. So here the strategy can be database and JWT. In case of database, the session cookies will only contains the user ID, and your session will be persisted in the database. The default is JWT, which is just an encrypted JWT, which is not stored anywhere. It is, you are receiving that on the fly. Okay, it is just generating it, that token, and it is giving you like from the session. So you can still force JWT session explicitly by defining the strategy, and this is the max age and update age. So whatever the session ID is being generated, that is the expiry for it. And here we are passing just a session JWT. So this is, you need to choose carefully. I mean, by default we are just using JWT. If we are using an adapter, let's say I'm using Prisma or I'm using TypeORM, then in that case you can just use strategy database. Otherwise there is no use of using database. Okay, so what happens is when you are doing a database, it will just store, it will use this cookie ID or session ID to look into the database. Does the user session exist in the database? It will query, and we need to create the tables for it, and we need to use these proper adapters, database adapter, Prisma, TypeORM, SQLize or anything. And here we are just checking, okay, credentials are there, then we are going to return some data. In our case, we are going to make a Axios or fetch to our external API by passing the user email and the password, and then obviously it will return us the data. And these are the callbacks and events. So callbacks and events are going to be an important piece, because here what we are doing is, these are the callbacks which gets triggered. What is the use of this callback? Like you wanted to put more things on the token, right? Then, or you wanted to return more things while returning the session. So in the callback we can use session and JWT. What we can do with this is, you can while returning the session, you can encode more attributes. Similarly we can do with the session. So here this is my current session, and with that I can also add the user object, so that when you do the get session at the client component or get server side sessions, you already will get this payload object, and here you are actually returning the user object from inside the session, right? So I know that when I do the get session, in the data I will get the user object that contains the ID, key, or anything. You can customize it. So I do also have a role. So while getting the session, I wanted to customize the response, because my token also has the role. So when you do the get session in the component, client components, I should also be seeing, okay, these are the session properties. Similarly, JWT. JWT is something which is generated by this Next Auth, but I want to decode, or I wanted to put some more attributes in the token, right? In that case you can use it. What we will be doing is, we can just customize it, and here we just need to return the object payload, like if user is there, which is coming from the session. So user equal to this, we can just get the user ID, and then what we can return is the whole token payload. This is my current token object, and just add these two more attributes. So these are the callbacks which are there to extend the content, right? So these are the two callbacks. And then, because you might use this token at the API level, and here you can see these are the pages like what all, sign in, sign out, error, verify request, new user pages you have. These are the callbacks. So callbacks are asynchronous functions you can use to control what happens when action is performed. So sign in action is performed. So let's see what happens when you do the session. If you are returning sign in false, for a particular scenario, in that case login won't happen after actually successfully signed in. It won't generate a session and all. So if you try to see, these are the session callback and these are the events. On successful sign in, you wanted to do something, you can do. On successful sign out, you wanted to do something, you can do. So like clearing out the sessions, when you are doing create user, update user, link account session, these are all the methods which Auth0 provides, NextAuth provides, and you can create a hook. Okay, I did successfully sign in, I wanted to do something, I can just do that with the help of events. So this NextAuth library is rich enough to do all kind of stuff. Callbacks, events are another important thing. Callbacks are really important, which we are using here, like session and JWT. So here I wanted to talk about one simple thing is people get confused what this JWT is. So NextAuth uses JWT sessions and where they are stored and how it is being happening, right? So NextAuth uses JWT to save the user sessions. I mean, if when database adapter is not used, if you are not using database adapter, then JWT token is used to save the user sessions by default. I mean, it's token contains that information, right? NextAuth by default uses the JSON web token for saving the user sessions. But when you use database adapters, so this is JWT, and when you are using adapters like Prisma, TypeORM, you can force the use of JWT when using even database also, right? So I mean this is little confusing that even while using these database adapters like Prisma, TypeORM and Postgres, you can still force by specifying the JWT in the auth options, you can force to store the user sessions in JWT token. So how this is really works, the JWT is stored in the HTTP based cookie. So you create a JWT token in the NextAuth and it will be returned in form of these HTTP only cookies, right? So you can use JWT to securely store the information. You do not mind the client knowing, because these are the HTTP only cookies and these are only be read by the server, and this token is not accessible by any third party. So this is how the NextAuth the mechanism is working when you are specifying the session using JWT based or the database based. But even if you are using database based, you can force NextAuth to save the user sessions using JWT tokens. So when we talk about database based sessions, NextAuth uses these adapters, and you will see the same set of database tables: account, user, session and verification token. Even you talk about the Prisma adapters or Mongo adapter, MySQL adapters or a Firebase or anything, you will see the same set of database tables, because the whole objective is to store the session information in these tables provided by the adapter. And now the adapter can be either Prisma, MongoDB or SQLize, TypeORM and all, but the whole objective is to store the session information and the user information in these. So you are onboarding your own database to store the user login information, account information and session information. So here this point is very important to understand. I mean, the code example you can see anywhere. The NextAuth code examples are available everywhere. So here, I mean, when we are using NextAuth, I tried both the approaches. One is a database based and another is a token based. I mean, we are not using any adapters, and then I was just using simple token based and allowing user to sign in with the Google, Facebook or using credential providers. So what is the major difference, and what should we choose and when should we choose? So when I used NextAuth without adapters, right? NextAuth without a database works well for the internal tools. Like you can log in with the Google, Facebook and all, it works fine. When using NextAuth with the database is usually a better approach for a consumer facing application where you want to persist the user information for accounts and billing and all. But there is a case, right? Because here I have my own APIs. So this is the NextAuth and my APIs are sitting here, because people get confused. It's not like, okay, everybody just building a Next.js application where everything is just in the Next.js. You may have an auth microservice. So then you need to use this credential provider to interact with this. In that case, user management is happening somewhere else. NextAuth is just validating the credentials being passed from here is being persisted or not. In that case, there is no scope of using these adapters, database adapters, because we already have auth service which is storing our data. We can just generate a token. Once using the credential provider, you get the data or the cookies. So here also there are some challenges, I will say, because this auth service can return a simple data which contains the token, user ID and password. And let's say if it is a cookies based, okay, it is just returning cookies in the JWT token, then you need to handle the cookies in the credential provider and need to propagate the cookies back to the your client component. I mean, from the cookies you need to extract the information and then you need to create something like that. So that is a totally different case. So these JSON web tokens can be, what is the advantage? Let's talk about that. JSON web token can be used as a session token, but also for lots of other things, such as like sending the signed object between the services for the authentication. Because what you are doing here is you created a token here. Let's say JWT based token you have generated, and you received that token in the cookies at the client end side, right? So what you can do is, this is HTTP only tokens which you are receiving at the client components. You cannot access that token from the client component from the browser. So what you can do then, what is the advantage of this? The other thing which you can do is, because we are using this Next.js, so we can create these custom routes. Okay, I want to fetch the profile information, and there is a profile microservice somewhere sitting somewhere else, but the token is generated by same provider or the same way. So I can use this token, I can pass this token to the profile service to validate. So I mean, at the service level, microservice level, you will be using these JWT tokens to exchange or authenticate and authorize the informations, right? Now you can also use this database based, where the database will be storing all the information like the user information and all, but in most of the cases I don't see much content and much documentation on it, because what happens is, either you are building a whole system in just a Next Auth API backend, because Next.js is backend also, where you can write your APIs, where you can persist the information in the Prisma. If you are building a single monolith, then what you can do is, here you can use this database, like I'm using Prisma because this is currently popular, and we will also see example. So Next Auth will use this adapter. Here we can persist all the information about the user information, profile, session information and all, and rest, once the session exists, you can also create your own custom tables. Let's say I'm building a ticket management system, so there will be a tables that I can manage, and this, after you validate it properly from the Next Auth using Next.js API route, so you will validate, okay, session exists, I will allow you to create a ticket, I will allow you user to create a put an order for the particular meal or something like that. So you can build a single monolith and all the data can be persisted in the Prisma. That is the use case when you wanted to use these adapters. Okay, so what we will see is, now let's go back to our example and talk more about it. So this is simple Next Auth configuration we have created, and we are passing that to the handler. Now next important thing is creating the other API routes and the pages in the application. So this is not the only information we are going to return. We can return the whole payload, which contains, like here we are really need to make an API call and get the data. Otherwise we can just return the data. Here you can do lots of things. You already have integration with the Prisma and TypeORM, just try to find the user in the database, or you can call the external API to validate, okay, username password is correct or not. So that is the use of the credential provider we have. Now what we will do inside API, will create our other folders like hello, there is another API we need for the register, and then another API we may need for profile. So what we can do is, we will create a register. I mean, we can create some simple functionality where we can also allow user to create. I mean, our user create in the Uber Eats clone happening in separate service, but there can be a route, and this is the session API routes we need to create. So create routes.ts in all the file, and then we will create a handler, either a get and post on this. So register means you will submit a form that will go to this API register. This will be the API route that will handle, okay, username, email, password is coming from the component, okay, check the database and either persist it or either just create a mock implementation for that. So I will just create a mock implementation for now. So it is just a simple route handler get, and then we can also create a pages. So this is our next auth. It is able to handle all these different cases, and here we can, what I'm doing is export default next auth. So here we can export the handler through the get and post. Get and handler as post. So I'm exposing both the methods through this handler. This is also route handler, and now this is simple hello handler. So when you say API hello, it will be returning this response. So here in the session, first we will try to get the session, server side session, right? This is important. Once the session is created, here what we are doing is we are validating, okay, session really has been created. If created, then only I will allow you to return the session, right? So what this API is doing is, this is a session get. This can be triggered from, this will be triggered from the components, and what we will be doing here is we will be just returning simple information, okay, so new next response, and inside this you can send the information. If session doesn't exist, then we can send a json.stringify. I mean, we need to send error message, right? Because session doesn't exist. And here in the second argument, we can send a status code. That is how it works. Status is 401, and then json.stringify null. Okay, and then if session exists, we can just return something else, new next response. And here .json, and inside this object we can send two properties. One is the session authenticated, that means true or false. If session is there, it will return true, and then session itself, these two properties it is going to return from this get call session. Okay, now next thing we are doing is adding the other handler, which is register. I mean, register will be a little different. Here what we are doing is we are going to get, because this is a Next.js API routes and we already know how to write it. We are getting some data from the request object. So we will be just getting that from the request body. So if session exists, then we can, because this is a register, it can be some simple public API also. We don't need to check the session here. I will remove that line, and here we will just do is, okay, if request.body contains the user object, we can use the Prisma typo and something like database adapters that we can use to store the information for the user. Okay, so that is simple register route. Here we can, currently there is a mock implementation. We are not doing anything on this. If there is an error while creating the user in the database, then we can just throw a 500. Otherwise what we can do is we can just extract the data coming from the payload const. I think it is coming from the request.body, await request.json. so this is how we are decoding the information, as I think it's a user object. So we can create a simple export interface user payload that contains these three attributes. We are just providing a type to the data which we are getting from the client only component that contains this form. I mean, that can be client only or server side component. It is just a page. So here we can just define the name as a string, I'm going a little slow here because so that we can talk each and every aspect of it: name, email, and the password. These are the three attributes we have in the user payload. And now I can just extract them from the request.json. So here I do have the name, email, and the password. So once I have it, I can do whatever I want. Currently, I will just return, because here what we will do is just store this data. Once you have the Prisma there, you can store this information in the database and just return the data. Now what we will do is, here we are returning this information: ID, email, password. So we will go to the documentation and check how we are doing it. So this is how we are going to attach the session provider at the root of our component. So use session unauthenticated. So let's say if you are moving to some protected page, then you can also use this, and if you're not logged in, then it will be just redirecting to this particular page which you are passing. So here we need to create the providers so that we can use this use session at the child components. So outside of this, we need to create a provider that we can pass to the root layout. Okay, that is the next thing we are building. So we'll create a here inside our app directory, because app directory is the root directory. We can create a provider.tsx, and inside this provider we will just try to pass the session at the root component, and that provider can be added to our root layout. So you can see here I'm using session provider. That is the next thing you have to do for your client components. And then this provider is a Next Auth provider. You will add that in the layout. So here you will use a Next Auth provider. That is the next thing. Okay, after creating a provider, create a wrapper and add that provider to your layout, so that, because layout is the root component, everything comes under your layout. So here we are using Next Auth provider, and everything we are rendering inside it. Now coming back to our app, and here we are going to create our pages or the routes. Inside the app we are creating the pages. So if you remember, this is app directory Next.js. So we can create the folder directly inside app directory. Profile will become a page. So here we need to create a profile page.tsx, right? Register. Similarly, in the register page, if we have a register screen, then we can create register page. And then components and the library. Components, if you have some reusable components, you can put it here. And the library, let's say if you are using Prisma, then you can create a prisma.ts, typeorm.ts. All the external library components can be kept there. So this is the default directory structure. Inside source we have app contains the API and all the other pages folders. You can have a components outside. Now inside src you can have anything, obviously. And inside a component we are creating a user components, which talks about the user profile, button components, and there is one more component, header component. Let's say for the login and simple, because we are doing a simple demo of Next.js with Next Auth. So we are going to create a simple login and register screen. So there is a simple header which shows you login register when you are not logged in. Once you are logged in, it will show you profile and logout. So simple simulation we need to do. So I'm creating a simple new bar header component. So this is simple login form we have created. So what we are doing here is simple response, and here we are going to, how you are going to submit the login. We are going to use the sign in provided by Next Auth, right? This is how, when you do the on submit event.prevent default, and then if when you are doing sign in, I will set the loading true, and then so I set form values. And here you can see this is a sign in method provided by Next Auth, which takes two parameters. I think there is a callback URL that we can navigate to, or in the other case, what happens is, if there is an error, then we can just use set error and pass the error message: invalid data passed, or invalid credentials, please check username password. And then if there is a catch, then we can just set loading false and then set error with the error object. This is what we are going to do. So this is simple, your login. Same kind of form you can create for register. Currently we don't have any database to store the register credentials, so we are only talking about the sign in. And here we just have a simple sign in form. We can create another button, submit button, that will take care of the form submission, a button type submit. And so when you click on to this, it is going to trigger on submit handler. So we need to disable this button when there is a loading happening, right? That is for the fraction of seconds. So that is, if loading is there, then show the loading message, otherwise show the sign in method, sign in message. So simple ternary operator to show, okay, this is the condition, to show the sign in message. And then so Google sign in with the GitHub, and what you are passing is, in the first argument is your provider name and the second argument is the callback. Now we can talk about building the header component. This is the client side component, so we need to use client at the top of the component, and this is how you are going to get the session, use session. And we already know that we are putting user object inside a data that we have done in the Next Auth configuration. So we got the user object. If user object is there, then we can show the different layout of the nav bar. I mean the different options of the nav links. If user is not logged in, then we will be showing only limited options. That is, okay, login, login register when you are not logged in, and if you are logged in, then profile and logout. So I'm just creating a simple header and putting the nav bar inside it. So here we will creating the multiple links. So you can see home, login, register, and demo next auth. These are the ULLI tags. Inside that I put this is the flex layout, and these are the flex item, justify center. And here if user is logged in, then show the login, show the login profile and logout. So logout is also provided by Next Auth. You just do on click and just call the sign out, and the profile is a separate route, so we will just create a / profile. You can just pass href with the profile there. And here, let me undo this. So this is the profile here, and this is, you can see, on click sign out. So this is our header component. Now we'll move to other components. So this is how you can create your client component, client only components, because you know how to get the session object there using use session. And then you can just do, okay, this is how you can fetch the data in that component. So this is a user component which you can use to show the user information. So what we are doing is, if session exists, I'm just trying to json.stringify the session object. That's it. So whatever the content inside a session, I will just try to expose it. So that is my user component. And then next thing I'm going to have is I can create a, okay, this is a use session component. Next we are going to create maybe the register, or I think the end-to-end. This is already done. We can start testing it. So here we are talking about the profile, right? This is actually if you see the profile page.tsx, this is a server component. We are not using use client. That means it's a server component, and to check the session we are going to use get server session. Get server session is a provided method from Next Auth, and we are going to pass auth option there. In the session.user will give you the user payload, and because this is the page where we are going to redirect when you are done with the login, so we are going to show the user information, at least the email and your username, the basic information about the user, which will tell you that you are logged in and this is your user profile information. So we can just import the header which contains the nav links, and then we already have this user object. So first of all we need to export this header component, so we can import it on the profile page.tsx. Now I can import this because it's export default. So import header from that is coming from components. We need to go one step up, two step. So it's inside a component and header component, and then I'm just stringifying it, json.stringify session. That should be enough. And here You don't need to use absolute path. Whatever you are putting inside source, you can use @ for that. Referencing @ component @/lib. So it's like a path will be shorter instead of doing a dot. And here what we are doing is we are just trying to show the profile information in some bold and the large text. This is the profile page, and in the profile page we are just showing, okay, if user profile object is there, then we are just if user is not there, then show the loading. Otherwise, if user is there, then show both the parameters, which is user.name and user dot, the next argument is I think user dot email. So that's all about the profile component. Now we can switch back to other page based component, server component. Export default profile, so that is good. Now login page.tsx we need to create, and we need to import the login form inside a page.tsx. Okay, so inside the page.tsx we still need to, we don't need to check the session first of all, because this is the login component and this is the public page which we need to show to the user. All right, so it should contain a JSX. It will be importing the login form, first of all the top header component, and then the login form page. So here you can see it is showing the login form, and I will try to skip that content because it's just importing the login form. And here we can see it's a simple login form, and here I'm doing a username password. I have this simple name bar just for the demo purpose. This is my home page, which is just showing the logo. So this is my login page, and you can see this is a page.tsx / with the default layout. Here also you can add a header, so we can show the header on all the pages. That's it. So I will go to the home page. I can see the header and then just a central image, and I can navigate to the login from the header. Now I will just do npm run build. Let's see if our build passes. If there is any build failure, we will try to fix it. So module not found, component header.components. Most probably there will be a naming issue in the files most of the time. So here what we are doing is next auth, it's routes. Okay, and then this is also the naming issue, header.components, not component. I will do npm run build again, so this time it should pass the build. Okay, page.tsx is not a module. Okay, we didn't create a page.tsx here, so I will just copy the page.tsx from login, and I will just paste it in the page.tsx for the register. And I, instead of login form, okay, there is a login form. Currently we are not using this register form component, but we'll just copy the same here so that we can get rid of this error. So this is register form, and we will do the export default. I mean, there is no register method in the provided by Next Auth here, because register is all happening through our APIs. We are creating API routes. We are going to trigger a fetch call or exhaust call. There we can just pass another argument. So here we have a name, email, password. I will try to fix this register. So we can fix this login form, name, email, and the password. Okay, so this email, password, and name. So here we will be doing the same thing. Here instead of that, we are going to make an API call to the register. So currently we can do the mock implementation, or we can call API auth register and pass all these attributes. Whatever we have, we are passing method post, and there is some API register. Okay, we don't have auth, API register. Yeah, it is API register. If you see the path directory, inside API we have register. So it's API register, and we are passing name, email, and a password in the body. So we go to the register page. Here instead of login form, it will be calling the register form, and we'll putting the register form in the page. This is our register form, simple. you can just fulfill this. The whole method is post, and you can pass the arguments and pass the body payload, which is body. Inside that you have json.stringify. What do we have is the form values. This is how you can set the content type in the headers, but that is optional. So that is all we have for this. And then here we can check if response is successful. Then if response is successful, we can redirect you to the login page, right? Otherwise we'll just stay on the register. If there is validation error and all, we can show that if response dot okay. So this is the fetch call. If response dot okay, not okay, or okay, if it is okay, then we will do the await and get the response JSON object. If response dot okay is not okay, then we are just going to add the error message, set error await response dot JSON dot message. So it is going to return as the message from the error object. Otherwise, if everything is good, what we can do is we can redirect, because we need to return, and here we can redirect to the login page. So sign in undefined. So what it will do is it will just go to the login page. Undefined means there is no provider defined callback to the sign in /. So it's going to navigate there to sign in page. So this is just object we have, and this is the server profile we are getting, and we can do the logout. It will get logged out. The other important thing is you also need to have an env. Inside env you need to pass the secret and the next auth URL. These are the two properties you need to specify inside env, because what is the target endpoints you are going to hit, how you are going to specify, you need to specify that in the env. And the secret, because we are using JWT is going to encode this token and create a JWT token using some secret key. So that we need to specify in our .env file. And .env file we are going to extend a lot, because there will be more parameters. So here we are just returning these parameters, login register. And when you click onto the register, enter the fake values, demo. It will work because we are not checking the session right now. I mean, we are not validating the credentials. We'll do the logout, and we can also check with register. So register also we are just submitting it. So this is all simple how we are building it. So we have created a auth options, adapters, provider, sessions, and a callbacks. Now what is the next thing? We are going to extend this. So we already have a Next.js app. We already have this Next Auth API setup. Let's say what happens. Let's say we are using either a custom API backend, or we wanted to check the user details against some database table which is there in the Prisma, right? We don't want to use the database like Prisma database to manage all the sessions and all. We can still enforce even after using these database adapters. So that is important thing what I'm saying. Even if you want to use these database adapter, like let's say I'm going to use Prisma adapter, but still I can force this Next Auth to store the session in JWT tokens. I don't need these additional 4 or 5 tables provided by the Prisma. Like you can configure users and all. I will just have a user table. So what that will do is, once you are sending this credential provider email and password, I will check that user data in the table. And when you are doing a sign up register, I will send this request to the API register endpoint, and will store the data and create the user in the database. And this is how we are checking the sessions and all. So this is a simple first demo. Now we are going to extend this